Sad.
Are you sad, Ben?
How could we measure that?
I don't know. Let's find out. Let's see if celebrities know things. This is the Fifth Stage podcast. That's who we are. I'm the host, Kyle Armstrong, joined as always by Ben and Emma. How's it going?
It's good.
It's good.
It's good. All right.
Or is it?
Or is it? Let's get to the bottom of that today, huh? Yeah. So we're going to talk about suffering today. Something that's been on my mind.
You might think it's similar to our Soul Crushed video earlier. No.
Nope.
No.
No, it's very different. This is like the concept of suffering, right? As opposed to suffering in society. So have you guys ever suffered?
I think so.
Have we ever suffered? Has
Yeah.
anyone not suffered?
I don't know.
That'd be... Man, get that guy on the show.
Yeah.
Someone who's never suffered. I don't think so. I mean, obviously, like, suffering is something that goes on in pretty much everyone's life, right? But what is suffering? And can it be worse in someone else's life? That's what we need to find out. Because I think that all suffering is equal, which is a pretty controversial thing to say. I know. But what do you guys think?
I disagree. I don't think it's all equal. I think some people suffer considerably more than others.
Okay.
I think some suffering is more intense than others, but it's impossible for you to like make that call.
Okay. Interesting. So we got a variety of views there. I need to turn up the headphones. Is that better? All right. I think let's just start out by saying, like, what is suffering, right? The definition, I thought it was interesting. So suffering, our word for it, comes from Latin fere, which means to bear. And I don't know. I thought that was weird because our modern definition isn't about, like, bearing the burden. It's just like, oh, you're dealing with like something terrible. So maybe language is a little bit behind the times on that concept right
Yeah,
now.
their definition sounds way more like stoic,
Yeah,
just to endure it.
to endure it. Yeah, our definition for it is to experience or to be subjected to something bad or unpleasant. And that's actually in parentheses.
Which is what is
The bad or unpleasant, it's just to experience or to be subjected to something. We just commonly use it to mean bad or
So
unpleasant.
you could be like,
Man, I suffered through that wedding.
yeah, but it just means you were subjugated
there.
to it.
Yeah, it's like
Exposed to
tolerated it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, actually, how the words kind of changed over time, and now it means like suffering is like this thing that everyone wants to avoid, you know, like no one wants to be tortured, right? Unless, I don't know, maybe someone out there, but most people don't want to. But I think, let's see. Let's see this. I think most suffering is equal, and we'll get into that, but I think there should be a distinction between physical suffering and mental suffering. And the words we have don't really elaborate that yet.
Do you think there's no connection between the two?
I do think there's a connection between the two.
I'd agree because being physically hurt will make you sad, right?
Yeah, in most cases.
Yeah. And I think I've heard stories before where, like, you know, being extremely depressed can have, like, physical effects on your body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, look at, what was her name? Padme?
Yeah, she died of a broken heart.
She did.
Wow.
She did.
Science couldn't save her.
And that was in a much more advanced society than our own.
Yep. I guess suffering can, like, in a mental way, impact you too, right? And that's kind of what I wanted to get to, was like both suffering in a mental way and in a physical way, I think are similar, right? Just physical suffering might have longer lasting and more immediate impacts that you can see.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean that mental suffering's any less
Mm.
valid, or I don't know, any less intense?
I'd say no.
That's
No.
we need to get to these questions, the heart of these questions. So if you say no, then how can some suffering be worse than others?
Well, I would argue that mental suffering is sometimes worse than physical suffering. Yeah, because it's harder to understand, I
Mhm,
guess.
definitely.
Whereas like physical suffering, like you can see the injury, or you can see what's happening, and usually like since we understand it better, there are more ways to like alleviate that pain. Whereas mental suffering, like that's something that we still don't understand all that well, and so it's harder to overcome, I guess.
That makes sense. I think, let's see. I'm thinking, here's my argument right now. I think all suffering is equal, right? In just the term of like whatever suffering is, right? But duration needs to be independent from the intensity. Because the duration, I think, is what most people associate is like, oh, they're suffering longer. And you can say like, by having a physical impact, right, that's going to be a longer period of suffering, right, because they have to overcome it their whole lives. Whereas if you have some other form of suffering, like a cold and it goes away after a week, like, is your suffering less? Well, I don't know, but it's definitely for a less amount of time, right? So I think we need that's where I get to, like, we should distinguish between length and intensity. Because I think intensity is, how can you say someone's suffering is more intense than someone else's? But it's open for debate.
Yeah, I think there are some types of suffering that are definitely more intense than others. For instance, if you have a cold, you're suffering, you're uncomfortable. But if you like lose a limb, like that's, I think, more intense suffering just on the physical sense than having a cold. And not only is it more intense, but it's going to last longer. So I would say that suffering is worse.
Okay.
Sorry, I was quiet. I kept having like a thought and then forgetting it and trying to remember it.
Did
while
you
listening.
remember it?
I did. It's kind of it's a slight tangent, but it's related to suffering.
Yeah, go for it.
Would you guys say physical suffering serves some biological purpose, right? And that tells us like stop doing what we're doing and get away from what's hurting us. So we don't like sit on stoves that are on and not know anything. Like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Or
don't
like-
know people sitting on the
Or like have a broken bone and not realize it.
Yeah.
So that serves a purpose for sure. But do you think mental suffering always serves like a biological purpose like that? Because it seems like sometimes people create that suffering on their own without like any like physical like benefit. Like was that benefit them with?
Huh. There might be a benefit, but who knows? I'm just thinking, I just watched Mindhunter, right?
Great
It's a great
show.
show. Everyone out there should watch it. But I feel like in that show, right, like Edmund Kemper, he creates suffering for himself in a way to explain away his abusive relation or his abusive past. So it might serve a purpose in that sense, right?
That's true.
I don't know, but like maybe creating internal suffering helps you deal with something in your past.
Or it could have like social benefits if you feel like, I can't think of the right word, but like someone who's like always suffering, it can like make you feel like you're doing it for other people, and like you can get some satisfaction out
Oh,
of
yeah,
that.
true.
If you feel like, you're always the one being put on with a burden, like you might not like that, but you can like pride yourself on it. So you might create that sense.
Of happiness from it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
that was it.
That was the end of that.
Hmm.
Well, I think this, like, we're trying to compare emotions, right? At this point, and I think that makes it more of an aesthetic argument,
Hmm.
because aesthetics is like, well, it's the study of art, right? But isn't art just like the expression of emotion? At least that's what I would classify it as. So if we're trying to compare emotions, how can you say like one person's emotion? Like, what if that person with a cold is like truly suffering? Like,
Yeah.
you with your own personal experience are like, oh, it's just a cold, it's no big deal. But for them, it's like, you don't even understand like
Right.
what this is like.
Especially, you know how with children we always say like, "Oh, calm down. Like this isn't that bad," when something bad happens to them.
Yeah.
But at that point in their life, it could very well be the worst thing that's ever happened
It's
to them.
true. They don't have any perspective.
Right.
Mhm.
So
So yeah, like what if like some other person is having that and like that really is like true suffering for them?
right.
But with our own world experience, we're like, oh, that's not suffering because it doesn't fit into our worldview.
So can you compare your own suffering like now to your own suffering when you were a child and you got sick?
I don't know. Can we recall like our emotional response? Sometimes I think we can like remember how we felt during like critical moments, but
Maybe.
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 But even
There's
then,
a-
that's
there's a
not
lot
like
of
a
evidence
perfect
that's,
like capture of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence of like memories are so inaccurate. We just like have a basic foundation of like, oh, this event happened, and then we like fill in the blanks with our own like
Mhm.
wants and desires for how it happened usually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I don't think you really could all that accurately.
So is it even possible to classify any emotions?
I don't think so. If you can't measure
remember
If you-
suffering, you can't measure any of them.
Yeah,
Unless
unless it's like a biological
like
thing.
a chemical response.
Huh. This is why we need people to like think about this. There was like surprisingly little information. I know I say that a lot on this show, but maybe it's just because we're on the cutting
We're
edge.
on
We're on the
the fifth stage
Like,
edge.
seriously, most of this stuff, like if you look up, is all suffering equal? And like Google Scholar, or, like philosophy and stuff, it's a lot of religious texts, which is yeah, interesting.
It is
But that
surprising.
makes sense though, because religion
Religion's
is
about
it's
dealing
a
with suffering.
comfort. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I feel like everyone thinks about the same question, though. You know,
It's true.
of
Is-
like, should I feel bad when other people might have worse lives than I do?
I actually, when I was doing research for this, I'll just say this. There was a German word. Germans have like a language that is very good for defining like abstract concepts.
The best words.
Let me see what it was called. It was like, oh man, I forget. Let me Google the word. You guys talk for a second.
I think there's this German word, I forget what it's called, but it like its definition is like the feeling of happiness you get when you see someone else suffer.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Is it like Schadenfreude?
Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like the enjoyment you get from watching someone else suffer.
Yeah. I think
So-
we
Is
can all
that-
relate to that.
Is that a normal feeling? Like enjoyment when someone else
I
is
mean,
suffering?
the Germans sure.
You've never seen like someone you don't like mess up or embarrass themselves and been like, yes.
I'm just saying, if that's not a normal thing, there wouldn't be shows like AFV and
Mhm.
I guess I
Cops
yeah,
making a murderer.
seriously. I think people want to like see other people's suffering so that way it lessens their own.
Yeah.
But is that a healthy thing?
it
What is health?
yeah.
If it's a
What is
normal,
health?
if healthiness is like what a normal human should be like, then it's very healthy, I think.
It's definitely the mean.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess
I mean,
a lot of people
there's a limit, you know.
Oh,
At
yeah.
least I'm not saying like a limit to what's like okay to feel, but there's a limit to what you should like admit to feeling, like
It's
in
true.
response to like what degree of tragedy you witness.
Oh my gosh.
You can kind of even like apply that feeling to like watching a car crash or like looking at a car crash a little bit. That's less
Yes.
enjoyment, more
I
like
wouldn't
fascination.
call that enjoyment, but I don't know if I see someone that I really don't like walking down the street and they like trip,
Yeah.
I might get enjoyment from that. But if they trip and like actually like hurt themselves or walk into traffic and actually get really hurt,
Yeah.
like,
Then you
I
feel
don't think I
bad
would.
for the initial
Yeah.
enjoyment.
I don't think I would get enjoyment from that. And
Yeah.
I guess we just want to see small inconveniences.
Yeah. Nothing serious.
yeah, we want to see them look silly, but we don't want to see them actually get hurt.
Because then you have to like self-examine.
Yeah, then you're like, man, am I a bad person?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think with these kind of things, language fails us a bit. Just because how can you like talk about concepts, right, when language is by definition like it relates to our own experiences, right? And so how can you begin comparing concepts like suffering when your definition of suffering and someone else's definition of suffering could be totally different things, right? And so if someone is, going through something and you look at it and you're like, wow, that's not that bad, but for them that's like true suffering, can you say that it's like any less than someone else's? That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it gets into a larger question of like, are all people created equal? We can get into that in a bit.
In God's image.
Yeah, in God's image too.
Here's a question. How able do you think we are to self-control what we feel?
To what extent are we slaves of our environment?
Yeah, and or like can we regulate our emotions in some sense?
I think we can't really regulate what we feel, but we can regulate like what we show.
Like our
Like,
reactions?
Yeah, like children can't really control, if they're sad, they're going to start crying no matter where they are, that type of thing.
Mhm.
But as you mature, you start to like be able to control your reactions. And that's, it's a part of growing up, but it doesn't mean that you don't still have those emotions. And it doesn't mean that you can like stop yourself from feeling sad.
That's interesting because those reactions are the only way like anyone else could like know how you're feeling, right? So if you control them like to another person, it would seem like you're not feeling it,
That's true, and that's that's something that like I think is unhealthy to
Mhm.
bottle it up like that. But saying that is a bit hypocritical because that's definitely how I deal with most things.
Mhm.
So, I don't know, but I don't think we have any control over like what we actually feel.
Is there free will? This is a very philosophical podcast.
I agree.
This is probably our most metaphysical one.
Yeah, I agree with them on that. You can't control what you feel, but you can control how you react to it.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's still okay to judge people for their emotions. Because, yeah, you're suffering. Okay. Like, you can't help that. I respect that. But you don't have to, like, act like this because of it, necessarily, Not saying, like, never act on how you're feeling, even if it inconveniences someone else. But
Mhm.
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Maturity.
Well, I mean, that gets to the heart of like the Stoic philosophy, right? It's like you're experiencing this, right? But that doesn't mean you have to, I guess, like settle into what that emotion dictates, Like you, at the end of the day, have control over your reaction. So you might, I don't know, choose the best reaction for you because instead of like getting sad about an outcome that you couldn't control, you could be like, well, I couldn't control it, so why am I getting sad about this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Sorry, guys, I wasn't paying attention. My mom's trying to figure out how to tune in,
Oh, she's going to
Oh.
listen?
and she's driving right now. So
Oh, no.
If she tunes in, you should ask her.
about suffering.
Yeah, suffering. Have your children been net happiness or net suffering on your life?
Man, that's getting to the real questions.
Yeah. Is that the only way we can measure a life?
By the suffering people go through. I mean,
And not their net worth?
I was looking for a word. I don't think there's a word that exists like this, but when I was doing my research for this podcast, I was trying to find if there's a word for like productive suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think, like, if someone loses an arm, like, that's suffering, and we can, debate all day about whether or not that's more intense
Worse
than
than a
something
cold.
else. Yeah, we can, debate that all day.
Or if a friend dying because you didn't give them your arm to eat, like, which is worse, losing the arm or the friend
The
dying?
friend dying is definitely worse.
Yeah, we can debate these, debate these
There's
questions
no
all day.
debate.
I don't want to shame someone who values their arm higher than a person.
I mean, assuming it's a person they care about, is that like
Mhm.
an assumption we can make in this narrative?
Their arm could be like the cornerstone, the cornerstone of their identity.
Of their religion.
Yeah.
Okay, this is getting a little too ridiculous.
Well, no, but
What was the point you were getting to, Kyle?
I don't even remember. Oh, I was trying to find a word for
Productive
productive
suffering,
suffering,
yeah.
right? Because if you're losing an arm, right, that suffering doesn't really net anything. Well,
Unless
maybe.
it allows your friend to live, but go on.
Unless like you can grow as a person through that event.
Pain alone
Yeah.
doesn't seem to like.
Yeah,
be
pain alone
productive.
isn't like a suffering worth like striving towards. But I was looking at Nietzsche, and his whole thing is like, well, not his whole thing, but one of his things was like, suffering is like the only reason to live, and that if you're going after productive suffering, like, for example, trying to further your education or something like that, like you're suffering with the concepts of like, I don't know, learning or whatever, but you're doing something productive at the same time. So I guess the question is, should we all just be masochists then and enjoy suffering like that?
I wonder if
Should we all turn off our humanity,
turn off our.
to use a Vampire Diaries term?
Yeah.
Shout out to Katie if you're listening. I think that would be bad.
Well, do you think he was using the word more in like the Greek sense of just like if you
Well,
want to live, like
that's why-
you should endure?
English is such a terrible language for like philosophy, just because like what is suffering? We don't even have a concise definition, because like under the current definition, like a physical ailment is suffering, but also like suffering for a good grade or something, like trying to learn material.
Yeah.
So we need a reform language for sure, but
But I would agree with what he said.
I think it makes a lot of sense. Because, I mean, otherwise, that's the question, right? Is if you're choosing to live, right, which is the first question, according to Camus, is whether or not to commit suicide. So if you choose to live, then the second question is, should you choose to suffer? I think logically that is a good second question to ask yourself.
Can you really choose that though?
I mean, you can, instead of like pursuing your own personal development, you could just, play video games or something.
But isn't life pain?
Well,
We
that's
have
the
to
question.
scrape the joy out of it every chance we get.
Yeah.
That's the question. That's I think that's at the core of like Stoic thought, is that they thought joy was like a thing to be avoided because joy wasn't productive in itself.
I would agree with that because change is only created by unhappy people, I would say. They're unhappy about something, so they change it. Where
Sure.
like happy people have always.
If
You
you're
know.
content living as you are, why would you
Yeah.
need to build anything, right?
I think you can, choose which one you want to be depending on, what you value in life. You don't have to bring about change if you don't care about that.
I guess.
Yeah. You can just reap the benefits of unhappy people.
I think on a much smaller scale, joy is important for like each person's mental health, though. Like
Mhm.
you're not going to get very far if you're just suffering all the
I
time.
mean, Marcus Aurelius, he ran an empire.
He never felt joy. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Probably less than he could have.
I'd say he was a very unhappy person.
Yeah. I think you can get by on suffering for like your whole life if you feel like there's some cause behind it that
I
is
guess
worth living a life for.
if you're doing it for like a greater good, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
If you sacrifice your life to the state, to the group.
To the group, yeah. I guess that's the only way to do it.
You think it's easier to find happiness or like sadness in everyday life just by like what comes at you or what you create?
What do you mean? I missed that
Is it
question.
easier to find happiness or sadness?
If you live like as neutrally and passively as like possible.
I think it's easier to find sadness.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting.
I mean,
So you have to create happiness more.
yeah.
think
you have
happiness is something you
have
need to
work
work
a little
towards.
bit more to see that.
Whereas if you're just being passive, like sadness can come upon you. I guess happiness can too in some senses, but it's more rare.
I think it's more sadness. I mean, if you're just like, if you just turn on the news, you know, you're not going to get happiness.
Well, in today's news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because modern society is soul crushing.
Oh yeah.
But-
Call back to episode 3. It's a
Two?
fan
I
favorite.
think it was.
Is it? It was 2. Yeah. Also, everyone listening out there, we have a YouTube page now. If you want to go look us up, it's Fifth Stage. Fifth Stage, and all the videos are up. Episodes 1 through 5. Give them a listen. Show them to your friends.
Yeah. Like, comment.
Subscribe.
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 Yeah, and so I think we're gonna post videos up there on a weekly basis now. So after each, I guess during the winter we're not gonna be doing this, but you know, mostly when we're doing the show, you'll see them up there. So that's fun. I don't know, what were we talking about? I just saw a plug for our own promotional benefits.
If it's easier to find happiness or sadness, I think sometimes like doing more things can give you more things to be sad about because if you like meet more people and see more things, sometimes it puts your own life in perspective in a way that makes you less happy. Because you might think you're happy, then you see someone else, and you're like, whoa, they seem way happier than me, and then you feel sad.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah,
That's something my English teacher used to say.
that's pretty heavy.
I know.
It is.
We could talk about that, but we
Well,
won't.
unless you're the person,
Being compared to.
yeah.
But even then, if you are like the best of the best, are you sad because other people are sad? Comparing themselves to you?
I don't think I would be.
Well,
Who knows?
we might need to like talk to Bojack about that
Yeah, yeah.
one.
Yeah, let's get him on the show.
Yeah, Will Arnett. Come
Aren't
on here.
you the horse?
I was gonna talk about are some people inherently better, right? Our Constitution, what's his name? Thomas Jefferson wrote down that all men are created equal, right? And he didn't really mean that because
He meant all white men.
yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Mm.
but let's debate the like philosophy behind that because if some people can suffer more, right? That means that it's like a quantifiable, like those people deserve more help, right? Assuming that we could say one person suffers more than another.
Yeah.
But if one person like is better than another person at like writing or something like that, or you know, the arts, right? An example I was going to use is Pablo Picasso. He's like considered one of the greatest artists, right? But apparently he was a real bastard.
Yeah.
And so does his like being quote unquote better than other people at art allow for his mistreatment of women and stuff like that?
I think the idea of all people being creative equal is just that you need to respect all people, and that all people are deserving of the same rights, you know, starting from like the same point. And if you do something to make yourself unworthy of that, like commit a serious crime like murder or rape, then maybe you're not equal anymore.
Mm-hmm. So you can't repent?
Picasso mistreating women is in itself a violation of all people being created equal because he's not being respectful.
Okay.
He's not treating people
Yeah.
equally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think they meant that in a slightly religious sense too. Of
Yeah,
like having
well,
a soul.
I think, yeah, they meant it on like a moral level, or like all people morally equal, as opposed to like, because both things are going on, right? Like obviously society,
equal,
like
yeah.
obviously people like in society, there's different levels because that's just the way it is, I guess, right now. But on a moral level, are some people better than others? Can some people suffer more than others? It all relates back to suffering.
On a moral level, no.
Yeah,
We're all trash together.
we're all trash together. Ben
But,
Harmon, 2017.
On like a capabilities sense, for sure, some people are better than others.
Hmm.
But that's like a value call on like what's worth being good at.
Exactly.
Do you guys think that it evens out? Like some people are, really good at a certain sport or whatever, but really bad at maintaining interpersonal relationships. And
I
some
don't.
other people like
I don't think it.
you don't think it evens out.
No, I don't think it like has to even out. Some people are just naturally gifted with no like drawbacks besides
Yeah, but
maybe
I
like
feel like
realizing it.
some people are like naturally gifted, but I think a lot of the time it just takes practice, right, to become that good.
Mm-hmm, for
And
sure.
so if you're practicing one skill, then you can be the best at that one skill. But then that means there's, a million other skills that you're not going to be able to like practice. So I think it does even out in some sense. And even people that are like naturally gifted, like savants and stuff, they're like brilliant, right? But the drawback is like decreased, emotional connection a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. If you see that as like an immeasurable like loss or deficit, then it would all even out because no matter like what skills you gain from like your intelligence.
Yeah,
like
there's
that-
like an infinity of skills you can't do.
Yeah.
And anything divided by infinity is 0. There you go.
Do you
guys.
think? Do you think the strongest person to ever live, and who ever
Best
will
on.
live, has like already lived and died?
Well-
Strongest physically or strongest emotionally?
Yeah, physically and like bench presses.
Emotionally, I think the strongest emotionally has already lived, but physically, no.
Yeah, I would agree with like modern nutrition.
Where did that question come from?
Well, I was gonna say like intelligence-wise, but
It is interesting though,
that
because
also seems to be on the rise.
like right now, what if this most intelligent person has already lived? Is that like, I don't know what? I guess that's sad, right? To think that
Yeah.
someone really intelligent lived in like maybe a time where they wouldn't have been appreciated.
Right. Well, I'm sure like geniuses die every day without ever doing anything.
It's true.
But idiots can be very successful sometimes. So,
That is very true.
so good.
So
and
it
bad.
all evens out.
It all evens out.
I think that gets into something that's worth talking about, right? I think AI poses an existential threat to us, right? Because a computer will be better at a human in everything, eventually.
Even emotional connectivity.
Well, that's to be seen, but I think eventually a computer will be on par with a human.
It'd probably be better at expressing it too.
Mm-hmm.
Could a computer be better at being a human than a human?
Ooh.
More human than man?
Well, watch
Well,
Ex Machina to see
yeah.
that.
and what would that even mean? Because if being human is like being imperfect, you become more imperfect.
Is that the definition of being human?
Why don't you look it up?
That's a big
Carl?
part of it. That's
We'll
like
get
our
the stats
difference from
guy
a
on it.
computer, right?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
humans are limited by their biology, right?
Mhm.
So I guess we are imperfect compared to a machine.
Yeah, even the machine's limited, just not by its biology. by
It's
its
limited by
hardware.
us, and we're limited by biology.
Yeah. It's limited by the number of atoms in the universe.
So would humans be able to create something that's unlimited?
I think so. Greater than itself. That's what our parents do with us.
No.
Yeah, if we arose from like unconscious matter, and if we think we're greater than unconscious life, then we could probably create something greater than us.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I was in biology today. This is a total tangent, but I was in biology today talking about genetics. And RNA actually controls a lot of what goes on in a cell. Like the DNA doesn't really do much. And I was wondering if, like, in that sense, right, DNA appears to be the host of the cell, right? Like, it seems like it. But is it really? Is RNA controlling it and DNA is just like a passive thing?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can, like, make that an even bigger thing. Like, our body, we're controlled by cells and stuff, and we have a, like, whole microbiome in ourselves. Are we controlled by, or, like, our body, or is our brain controlling it, the body, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question. Are we just, like, passengers on this trip?
That's what I would say. We're like not in control in reality.
I think so, too. And I think
If you ever feel a way that you wish you didn't feel,
that
you
you're
have to
not-
admit that you're not in control. If you don't want to feel pain and you do, you're not in control, like consciously. It's just the illusion. That's okay.
Here's the definition of being human, by the way. It's distinguished by other animals by superior mental development, power of articulate speech, and upright stance.
That's so stupid. Well, that's like the most literal, I guess, definition.
Well, I mean,
Then
it
you
is,
can make a robot that is that already. That's okay. It's
Yeah.
human.
Yeah.
It
Stands
stands
up,
upright,
it's
talks very well.
Smarter than animals.
Yeah.
it's. I mean, have you heard of the, like, I forget the philosopher in Greece, but someone was like, a human is a featherless biped. That was their definition. And then the next day, one of the other philosophers ran into the thing with a chicken that was plucked and was like, "Behold, man." So I think classifying anything, we run into walls like that, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's hard for us to say what we are, you know,
Yeah.
since we are what we are.
Yeah.
That's like asking a rock what it is. It's like, I'm a rock.
But is a rock conscious?
I mean,
Let's just let that one sit.
okay.
We'll let the
Alright.
viewers decide
Yeah.
that. Man, I don't even remember what we were talking about, but that whole thing about being passengers, I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense.
You know
Crazy. And I
how.
feel like we spend a lot of time and energy like assuming that we're in control
Yeah, exactly.
when really like is anything that we do like in that sense necessary, or can we just sit back and let things happen to us?
So that's the question of free will.
Yeah.
right? If we're just truly passengers, does it matter, like, us making choices?
I think it does because, like, we're not actually making choices. We are just, like, giving the appearance of it, you know, like a robot, you know? Like,
Mhm.
it's not making those choices. It's just being programmed to do. And I think we're just programmed to act the way we are, like, every, like, moment of time. Like, since the universe began. Like, this is how it always had to play out. And so no choices are ever really made. It just seems like it.
So you're not actually choosing to let your friend eat your arm.
No.
It was
The-
just
the
always
choice
gonna
was always
happen.
The
made.
choice was already it was already made when the atoms were first put like in the position they all were. Like that's when the choice was made.
Yeah, and it's okay that we don't have free will, I think, because we could never know the choice,
Yeah.
right? Like, we're operating with imperfect knowledge, right? So theoretically, if you knew the positions of every particle in the world, then maybe, like, having, like, the illusion of free will wouldn't be as fun because you're like, oh, I already know the outcome.
Mm.
But we're operating with imperfect knowledge.
Yeah,
So to
yeah.
us, it feels like, oh, it's a novel thing. But
Yeah. We're like animals in a biome at the zoo.
yeah,
Puppets that can't see the strings.
like tears in the rain.
Like leaves in the rain. Do you think that's what a god would be? Like something
With perfect knowledge.
right, who could like actually make choices,
Ooh, and could make choices.
who isn't constrained by like
Hmm.
predetermination or anything.
I guess. I
'Cause
guess
we-
that is the concept of a god
Yeah.
as we think of it.
Yeah, because if it knew that and if it could make choices, I feel like once you can make any choice, you are also able to make any choice, right? Because like you have to be free to make like even the smallest choice means you're free from like it all,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what most people would say a God is. Like they can do anything, they can make any choice for like what they want to happen.
I think. Have you seen the movie The Invention of Lying?
With Ricky Gervais?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You sounded a little
With
hesitant
the
there.
with the pizza boxes?
With the pizza boxes. Have you seen it?
I
Emma?
have not seen it.
Okay, well, I think that's a good example of what you're talking about, right? It's about this world where no one can lie, and then all of a sudden he figures out how to lie, and so it's like everybody else doesn't have free will.
Yeah, in comparison to him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, would you want to have that power?
I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't end well for him.
Yeah. Well, he was so constrained, you know? Yeah, that wouldn't be fun.
Well, it's definitely worth a watch if you want to watch a movie this weekend. But yeah, that's cool. I think anything to do with free will, it gets into that like weird territory where you're like, like what's the point of making a choice, you know? And even the Stoics back in Rome were like dealing with that of like, if every choice has already been made, like, why should I make one, you know?
But even not making one
Is a choice. Yeah.
So you can't avoid it.
I think that's the way I've kind of rationalized it too, is like when we're born, we're already like given a biology that wants to keep us alive, right? And we didn't even make that choice. That's just our body's like, you're going to stay alive, you know? And we're going to make sure you do. Like when you're hungry, we'll make sure you know it, you know? That kind of stuff. So if you're not making the choice to stay alive, then you can like take control over your response to that, right? Because you can be alive and not experience suffering, or you could be alive and experience suffering, I guess. Bringing it back to suffering. But you're able to choose your response to that question, even though you didn't choose the answer.
Mm. You can feel like you chose it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I think that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think of that?
Hmm.
I think it's interesting how people can view control and like self-control in totally opposite like senses, you know? Some people want their lives to be controlled and some want to feel like it's not controlled by anyone but themselves, you know?
I think most people want their lives to be controlled, but they won't admit it.
Hmm.
Because, I don't know, it sounds weak when you admit, like, you know, in our culture, like, saying you don't want to have control, it sounds, like, bad, but I think most people do, and that's why cults are a thing, right?
Mhm.
Because
Exactly.
you crave, like, the control, the order. But I don't know, I mean, I think most people fantasize about it, but if they were actually, like, totally under control, they wouldn't like it.
Yeah, like I don't like the idea of not having a choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the more restrictions you add to something, the
Mhm.
more it feels like you're being boxed in, kind
Yeah.
of. So I think a lot of people want a certain amount of control where like they know that they'll be safe at least and they don't have to actually do anything about that. It'll just happen because someone else is in control.
Mm-hmm.
But then like beyond that, like I think a lot of people prefer to at least have the illusion of being
Of
able to
freedom.
choose for
Yeah.
themselves.
They don't want to be confronted with the truth that they actually don't have any control.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting question. Well, I mean, that's kind of the end of what I had planned.
So in conclusion, all suffering is not necessarily equal.
All suffering, wow.
But who's to
I don't know
say?
if we entered it. Yeah.
I don't know that we really
Who's to
talked
say
about
that? I mean, can you say, like, your definition of suffering is right when you don't know, like, someone else's definition of suffering?
If you can say that objectively, you should give up your arm to a friend. And yes, you can.
It's true.
But
We're operating in a moral gray area here.
right, how? Here's a question: should a society assume that suffering is equal, or should it assume that suffering isn't equal? Because that has like wide implications about how it treats its people.
I think we should assume it isn't equal, even though
It is.
it is.
Because that'll make people.
Well,
feel
because
better.
I think both things are going on at the same time, right? Like, you can say, like, on a surface value, right? Like, this piece of art is better because it reached more people, for example. But could you say, like, a piece of art that no one likes except for one person, but that person loves it, right? Could you say that piece of art is, like, less value?
But what about a piece of art that only one person just kind of likes?
That doesn't
Wow.
matter.
That's-
Well, is art only based off
I
what
mean,
people think about it, or does it like stand alone as a valuable thing?
no, it's based off what people think.
So if art is like forgotten, it's nothing anymore.
Yeah, and how
Well-
about art that wasn't appreciated when it was made, but then now it's like
Well, we can get into that. We only have 5 minutes left. I think, but like if, let's just say like one person absolutely loves that one piece of art, right?
okay.
And there's an art, like a piece of art like millions of people love, right? Are they of the same quality? Well, on surface value, no, because one person versus a million people, but on like an emotional level, like that one person loves it, and same with individually, each one of those 1 million people
Right.
love it. So
And what if that one person was an art critic and the rest were just like plebes, you know?
yeah, so it means more.
Right.
No, but that's how I see suffering, right? It's like you can say like, yes, suffering appears to be worse, just in like duration of a suffering is like longer or something. Like there's quantifiable aspects to it, but the underlying like emotion of suffering, I think, is equal, and they're both going on at the same time.
I would agree.
Thanks, Ben.
It's like
I've convinced you.
I mean I kind of thought that already.
All right.
It's all relative. Like suffering, and then you just have like relative degrees of it that don't really mean anything.
Yeah, I'm talking about true suffering.
You think there's fake suffering?
Yeah,
What's that?
I don't know.
Someone who's lying about it.
I don't know, but like true suffering. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? I mean,
So you're saying there's like a base unit of suffering and it can be like multiplied by vectors of duration or intensity.
yeah, and so like people that are suffering for like longer periods of time, or like suffering that has a longer lasting impact. For example, like mental trauma at a young age, right? That has a long lasting impact because like that's something you can't overcome. So that's something you should probably address first, compared to like someone suffering for something that might go away in a week.
Mm.
Well, if I told you suffering could be measured.
Well, then why are we even talking?
Well, do you think it could be ever through modern science?
Well, if it's like a biological thing, right, then I guess you could quantifiably be like, oh yeah, this person has this many like neuroreceptors in their brain, so their suffering is like slightly more severe, quote unquote. But what does that mean? Like, what if that person's like less receptive to the neuroreceptors or something?
It's true.
So it's equal regardless. I think it has to be like, it has to be experienced by the individual, right? As opposed to like,
What about if like
okay,
mind sharing became possible, so you could experience someone else's suffering? So then you get like
yeah.
a third party to be like, that person feels way worse than you do.
Like Spock can do.
Exactly.
Spock
Yeah.
can do. But it's still dependent on Spock.
It's true.
So his definition of suffering is now what's being measured against your two individual definitions.
Yeah, but then at least you can have one like standard definition.
If it was a completely objective computer
Yeah,
doing it, then maybe.
and then would it be wrong to like make decisions based off of that? Because that's kind of what we try to do already, just
Yeah.
like imperfectly.
I think, well, I mean, we already make arbitrary scales all the time, right?
Yeah.
In science, especially.
What's a
What's a Celsius?
yeah? What's a degree? What's a second?
Yeah.
What's a second?
Seriously though.
It's 1/60th of a minute. That's all it is.
It's true. Time has no reference. So I mean, I guess if we made like a reference scale of like Spock is neutral on suffering, and then we compare it based on that.
Settle all disputes accordingly.
I mean, wait, is that a good thing?
I don't think so, because I think people, to win that, they can make themselves feel worse, like just by like through thought alone. You know, I think we can agree. You can make yourself feel worse. Than, you know, even if nothing's like happening to you besides yourself. So then they'd be like, okay, like
I'm really
feel
gonna-
bad, you know. ah.
I mean, maybe. I don't know if
I feel
making
like-
decisions based on that would be good.
Yeah. I feel like fake suffering would have to be filtered out somehow.
So there is true suffering.
Well, if you're just making yourself feel bad to win.
So we shouldn't
That's
show
fake
sympathy for people who like have a negative self-image that makes them feel bad about themselves.
Well, where does that come from, though? Like a deeper mental health issue?
If they're not like trying to do it,
But when you say trying to do it to yourself is a deep mental health issue,
yeah,
Yeah.
there's something else going on.
yeah. That's why I think logically we can all agree we shouldn't care about others' emotions at all, you know, when making decisions. But we have to.
That's true. I mean, suffering, right?
Yeah.
We all deal with it.
It's just not efficient.
No, it isn't. But evolution's not efficient.
And that's why we gotta make computers.
Even those won't be efficient, like truly efficient. Because what if a computer makes a computer?
You're right.
Hmm.
Only non-existence is efficient perfectly. Pure.
Maybe. Maybe. I mean, who knows? What do I know? This is just the fifth stage. We just talk about things like we know what's going on.
We talk about things we're not qualified to talk about.
Well,
Yeah, but it's interesting.
Yeah, apparently
That is interesting.
no one's really talking about this.
Yeah, I think people
Now
should
we
like,
are the
think about
authorities.
Yeah.
suffering.
If everyone's suffering is equal, we are the leading experts, you know, equally.
Equally. That's true. I mean, tell your friends if you want to be on the cutting edge of modern philosophy. Well, maybe, but
What do you guys think the next great debate is? Yeah, leave it at that.
that's our show. The next great debate,
Yeah, it's probably like
money reform.
no, that's not great enough.
What?
I'd say it's probably like I don't know. Should we treat robots like people if they're conscious? Air quotes.
Money reform.
Is it okay to eat animals?
Oh, interesting that you should bring that up. I was going to talk about this. Apparently, Generation Z, the generation after the millennials, they're like disgusted with eating animal meat.
Really?
Yeah, even though their parents are like fine with it.
So which generation is that?
Generation Z is the one after the millennials.
So
And we're-
s-
which
I
one?
think we're the tail end of the millennials, or like the
Yeah.
very
Okay,
beginning
yeah.
of the millennials.
I think we're the beginning of the millennials. If millennials
I
are
feel
people
like-
growing up around the 2000s.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
We might be like toward the tail end.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know what like age this is. These are based off. Like
But
Is-
Gen Z is younger than us.
yes.
Okay.
And-
And Gen Z is like apparently like disgusted by eating animal meat, and it's creating a huge market for like synthetic meat.
That's
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
They're weak.
And I think, well, like, what if in like 40 years that becomes the norm, and then those people are going to look back on us like
like killers.
barbarians,
Yeah,
you know?
That's interesting.
Because we're like totally fine eating meat, and everyone's like, I'd never give it up, but
Yeah. I think it's okay as long as you
I think
don't
like,
do it for any like moral. You don't try to justify it morally.
Yeah,
You're
this is
like,
just-
I just do it.
Yeah.
Without
we're
any
just
thought.
products of the time, right?
Huh.
I think we can all agree if there was a way to get meat like without killing animals, that'd be great.
If it
Yeah.
didn't inconvenience me like at all.
Yeah, if it still tasted like meat.
Yeah.
If it
So-
wasn't like way more expensive than meat.
Exactly.
Yeah, so once now that there's a market for it with the Gen Zers, I think there's going to be a lot more research into it.
Man, that's like the
interesting.
same reasoning for slavery. Like, yeah, I wouldn't want slavery if like we could get this work done as like cheaply as we can with it, and then that like became the reality, you know,
Yeah.
with industrialization. So they're like, okay, no more slavery, and now we're just like that with animals.
It's true. So I'll leave you guys with that little tidbit. I don't know. Don't eat animal meat,
Yeah, I mean, that's the
Buying
way to
that
go
synthetic meat.
if you can do it.
and don't suffer, or should you suffer? I don't know. Take out of what you can from this podcast.
Should we make animals suffer? It's good for them.
Well, that's a question for another day. So we'll see you next week. Enjoy your weekend. And next up, I think, who is it? Uncharted. Uncharted. If you want to listen to that person,
I love
I don't know
Uncharted.
anything about their show, but
I listen every week.
Ben's their biggest fan.
it's true. We all, after this session, we just go into the booth and listen to the Uncharted together. It's weird.
It is weird. All right.
All right.